Thank you, Madam Speaker. The government will use every tool at our disposal to punish all those responsible for violation of international law, such as human rights abuses. As you know, sanctions have proven to be effective foreign policy instruments to hold bad actor regimes accountable for their blatant disregard for the rules-based international order. The government may choose to use sanctions in situations relating to a grave breach of international peace and security, gross and systematic violation of human rights, and significant acts of corruption. Russia's continued war of aggressions against Ukraine is just one example. In reaction to the Russian annexation of Crimea and the most recent developments in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, Canada has imposed a series of individual and economic sanctions. Sanctions may be enacted through a number of instruments, including the United Nations Act, the Special Economic Measures Act, SEMA, and the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act, JVCFOA, or Sarbanes-Oxley law. The government may choose to use sanctions in situations relating to a grave breach of international peace and security, gross and systematic violation of human rights, and significant acts of corruption. Under our autonomous sanctions legislation, sanctions against individuals and entities can include a dealings ban, effectively an asset freeze, restrictions or prohibition on trade, financial transactions or other economic activity. Canadians are also prohibited from dealing with sanctioned individuals, effectively freezing their Canadian assets. Canada's well-managed immigration system has a strong global reputation, in part due to its well-balanced enforcement system. For nearly 20 years, Canada's Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, IRPA, has worked in tandem with our sanctions legislation to ensure bad actors are found inadmissible to Canada. The IRPA defines the applicable criteria for all foreign nationals seeking to enter or remain in Canada, including grounds of inadmissibility that would lead to an application by a foreign national for a visa or entry to Canada to be refused. In case of the inadmissibility provisions of the IRPA, as they related to sanctions, decisions are relatively straightforward. If an individual is explicitly identified under one of the sanctions triggers, then they will be found inadmissible to Canada under the IRPA on that basis alone. However, inadmissibility provisions of the IRPA, as currently written, do not fully align with all the grounds for imposing sanctions under the SCMA. In 2017, two new sanctions-related inadmissibility criteria were brought into the force by the Senate Bill S-226. S-226 ensured that foreign nationals sanctioned under the SCMA are inadmissible to Canada, but only in circumstances of gross and systematic human rights violation and systematic acts of corruption. This approach meant that foreign nationals sanctioned under other provisions, such as a grave breach of international peace and security, which has been frequently used in sanctions imposed in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, were not inadmissible to Canada. In other words, this means that Russian individuals sanctioned under the SCMA may nevertheless continue to have unfettered access to travel to, enter, or remain in Canada unless they are inadmissible for other reasons. Madam Speaker, this is unacceptable and runs in direct opposition to the government's responsibility to protect our country's residents. It also contradicts the very essence and purpose of these sanctions against foreign entities. As you know, Madam Speaker, Parliament previously identified this as a legislative gap in Canada's sanctions regime. In 2017, the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development, FAAE, recommended that IRPA be amended to designate all individuals sanctioned under SCMA as inadmissible to Canada. The legislative amendments we are discussing today under Bill S-8 respond to these recommendations and will help to further bolster Canada's sanctions against bad actor regimes. Among other important amendments, Bill S-8 will help ensure all foreign nationals subject to sanctions under SCMA are inadmissible to Canada. If passed, the current inadmissibility ground relating to sanctions would be expanded to ensure foreign nationals subject to sanctions for any reason under SCMA would be inadmissible to Canada. Madam Speaker, these important amendments would ensure sanctions have meaningful consequences from both an economic perspective and in terms of immigration and access to Canada. In adopting these measures, Canada would be sending a very strong message to the world. Those who violate human rights are not welcome in our country. Madam Speaker, the Government of Canada will continue to stand firmly against human rights abuses abroad, and we will hold both Russia as well as all other bad actor regimes accountable for their actions. At the same time, the government remains firmly committed to protecting the safety and security of all residents here on Canadian soil. Fully aligning the inadmissibility provisions with grounds found under Canada's autonomous sanction legislation will result in a significant increase in the number of sanctioned nationals being rendered inadmissible to Canada. These include individuals sanctioned as a result of their role in grave breaches of international peace and security, resulting in serious international crisis, as well as individuals sanctioned as a result of calls from international organizations. This includes sanctioned individuals from Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, Iran, Myanmar, Syria, South Sudan, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and North Korea. Without these proposed amendments, Madam Speaker, many of those who are sanctioned in these states may continue to access Canada and threaten the safety of all those who live in our peaceful country. Bill S-8 is urgently needed to address this gap in our current legislation. For this reason, I implore all honourable members of this House to support this important and timely legislation. Thank you, Madam.